Mr. King, BB&T has obviously a very strong commitment to ethics and ethical leadership, and part of that's evidenced by the generous gift to the University of North Georgia, the Center for Ethical Leadership. And I'm curious, having made that contribution and made the commitment, what do you want to see as the outcome from that?
So what we're trying to accomplish at BB&T, and from a long-term perspective, is really to make the world a better place. We feel like we should morally give back to our communities because frankly, we've been around for 142 years and the communities have been really good to us. Of course, we're trying to optimize the long-term return to our shareholders. They own the company. But we're trying to do that in what I consider to be kind of a wholesome way of helping all of our constituents be better. So we're trying to help our clients be more successful. Well, guess what? When they're more successful, we get to be more successful. We know in order to help our clients be more successful, we have to have associates that are engaged and are focused on actually helping the clients, not just to make a nickel, but to help them be more successful and happier in life. And likewise with our communities, and then ultimately our shareholders do well. And so the way we believe you do that well is to focus on doing the right things for the right reasons. And that's where ethics comes in. And so, you know, there are many companies, there are many individuals around the world, unfortunately, that aren't ethically based. And people say, well, yeah, well, they make a lot of money and I suppose that's possible. But it's not the way we choose to live, professionally and personally. We want to make the world a better place by adhering to our values. Our values are really important. Values is another way of describing ethics. And so it's always been a really core part of our company. It's just the way we live. People that are attracted to BB&T are people that have a strong sense of values. People that somehow occasionally find their way into BB&T but do not really adhere to and believe in the kind of values we believe in, they don't stay here.
I can understand that. You know, I guess the best way to put it is in the field of ethics, if you ask people, are you ethical? Everybody will tell you they are.
Right.
Yet, in the media, we have examples every week of people making some really stupid and unethical choices, sometimes illegal choices, which get them in a world of hurt. So, from your perspective, how has the business climate ethically changed over the past 20 years, if it's changed at all?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, if you go back thousands of years, since the beginning of time, I suppose, there's plenty of evidence of bad people doing bad things. There are good people in this world and there are people that are not so good. Of course, the people that are not so good, to your point, believe they are good and the other people are bad. So the real question becomes, well, what's really right? You know, and if they're doing what we consider to be bad things and they think they're right and we're doing what we think is good things, who's really right? Mm-hmm. We could have a philosophical or even a spiritual discussion about that. But I think everybody at the end of the day has to draw their own answer to that question. In our view, my view, it's about the impact that you're having on the lives of other people. If you live your life on this earth, and when your life draws near to an end, if you can look back and say, and it really be true, that I did my best to make a positive impact on the lives of as many people as I could, then in my view, you lived an ethical life. You lived a life of really trying to be honest, to be a person of high integrity. You know, you're a person of mutual supportiveness. You're a person who looks for win-win relationships. You know, you're not always trying to make money at the expense of somebody else. There's nothing wrong with making money, of course, but you don't try to make money to somebody else's disadvantage. You know, if you're trying to accomplish any goal in life and you're doing it at the disadvantage of other people, it's not ethical. If you're approaching life from the viewpoint that you're trying to do what you do in a way that supports and encourages others to be more successful and happy, then you're an ethical person, in our view.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because in many cases I have said one of the lessons I learned in life the hard way was that, to me, success is defined by the impact that you have on other people's lives. And so it's kind of refreshing to hear you say essentially that. And let me ask this. From your perspective, what can people do? I know what BB&T's commitment is, but what can people do to help encourage ethical action?
Well, I really believe the most important thing we can all do to encourage ethical and, frankly, behavior in general that leads to success and happiness is to live your life in a way so that every day you be proud for your mother to see what you did.
I like that.
Because you can do things in the shadows, and sometimes you get away with it. But at the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. And an ultimate sense of success and happiness is about feeling good about yourself. It's about having a sense of self-esteem, a sense of pride in how you've lived your life. So it's not about what you achieve, it's how you achieved it. It's not about how much money and stocks and bonds and houses and cars you have. It's about what you accomplished in life, but more importantly, the way you accomplished it. If you accomplish whatever you accomplish in life in a way so that at the end of the day you feel like you have made a positive contribution to the world, then you have been successful and happy. And by the way, there may be some people, I've never met them, that make a lot of money, have a lot of success in a way that is not ethical. I've never met one. Deep down inside, they know they're not doing what's right. I think God has given us all a deep inner sense of what's right and wrong. And if we live our lives in a manner that's trying to be right, we're never going to be perfect, but trying to do what's right, then we have a good chance of achieving success and happiness.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and often I say every choice has a consequence.
Right.
Even those people who do wrong and might be okay with it for the time being, eventually the consequence takes place. Let me switch gears for just a second. Surviving the Great Recession has been pretty challenging over the past 5 or 6 years, and some people might have anticipated it, but most of us weren't quite prepared. So what has BB&T learned over the past 5 or 6 years that makes the organization stronger and more effective?
Well, as you know, we came through the Great Recession much better than many companies did. And that was because of a lot of the fundamental basic values, behaviors that we had lived by. I mean, for example, we didn't do a lot of the negative and counterproductive things that a lot of financial institutions did. We didn't make the bad mortgage loans that a lot of people have gotten hurt by and have gotten a lot of media attention. We just didn't do that, not because we couldn't have made money. We could have. In fact, we could have made a lot more money going into the recession than we did, but it was not the right thing to do. It was not helping our clients be successful. And so we went into the recession and came through the recession in a good place. Now, but we have learned. So one of the really big takeaways from the recession to me, and I think this is instructive for companies and individuals as well, is that there's a healthy balance between capital or net worth for individuals and diversification of assets. Most of the big companies and most of the individuals that got in trouble were the ones that had borrowed too much money and had too much concentration of assets. So some of the big companies like Lehman and Bear Stearns and AIG and others, they had leveraged themselves too much, meaning they had borrowed more relative to their underlying capital, and they had made really big bets on individual asset classes like mortgage loans, subprime mortgages.
Right.
So what I've learned is that you should always be have very strong capital, and you should always be very diversified. So over the last 6 years or so, while I've been CEO, we have focused on even strengthening our capital and being really resolute about having a very diversified strategy. That means diversification in terms of products and markets as well, and strategies, because life is dynamic.
Right.
I've not met anybody that can figure out for the next 5 years exactly what the economy is going to be. And so if you want to have good, long-term, sustained, stable growth for your shareholders, then you need to have less volatility. That's where diversification comes in. So, for example, today BB&T is very diversified. We have regular banking services like loans and deposits, but we have insurance. We have commercial mortgage operations. We even have a little company called AFCO CAFO, which finances insurance premiums across the United States and Canada. In fact, we're number one in both areas. So it's about diversification, and it's about proper capital. And then I think sticking to your values, sticking to your strategies. Another thing that people made mistakes in was changing on a dime kind of how they run their businesses. I always say to our associates, there are three things about our company that are non-negotiable. It is our vision, our mission, and our values. We will not equivocate. We will not negotiate over that. Now, everything else we do is either strategic or tactical. They change all the time. And the key is to not get hung up on the strategy or the tactic, but to be vested in the long-term mission that you're trying to accomplish and be deeply rooted in your values. Because if you're not, when the strong winds come, when the difficulties come, if you're not really entrenched in what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, then you'll find yourself taking shortcuts, trying this, trying that. First thing you know, you're on a slippery slope. You're way down the road towards bad ethics, and it never turns out good.
Well, didn't you say BB&T had been around for 143 years?
Right.
I can remember a lot of banks, and I grew up in Western North Carolina, that have come and gone with the winds because of perhaps not adhering to that mission and value. So I have to say, I congratulate you for doing that, because there aren't many institutions that you can look at that has that history.
Right.
Because of, or as part of the recession, small businesses tend to be challenged with lending practices. It's kind of like there was a pendulum, and it swung way too easy for some period of time, and then perhaps it got way too hard. What advice can you give the small business owner when it comes to what they should be doing and how they should be approaching a BB&T to secure the capital that they need, or the lending portion that they need to grow their business?
Right. Well, I've always had a very strong interest in small business. When I first started out with the bank 42 years ago, I was a small business lender, and I grew up in a very small community on a farm, so I've always had a strong affinity to the small business operators. They really are the heart and soul of America. They create more jobs than all the big businesses. And so small business is very, very important. But small business is very hard. It's really hard to run a small business because, in a big company like BB&T, we have people, experts in accounting, marketing, human resources, legal, on and on and on. If you're running a small business, sometimes with only a handful of employees, you kind of have to do all of that. So the most important thing that small business people can do is align themselves with a group, kind of a partnership of outside professionals that can give them the expertise, guidance that they do not have. So have a really good lawyer, a really good accountant, a really good banker, and a really good pastor to help you when you're in real tough times.
Right.
But really, where small business people make mistakes is they think they know more than they know. And so they try to make all these decisions by themselves, and they just don't have the expertise. I mean, I couldn't do the right things in our legal area or our accounting area. I'm not trained in those areas. And so to some degree, a small business entrepreneur is in the same job that I am in. I'm the CEO of BB&T, they're the CEO of their company. I have inside resources, but they have outside resources. So the first thing I would say is always be quick to build your partnership team before you need them. Don't wait till you have a challenge or have a problem to then go find yourself a good accountant, because you want to align yourself with people that you trust, that have common values, that when you go to them that they have the same interest in your business that you have, that you're getting really good, sound, ethical advice from them. And so that's important. The other thing is to have a clear vision about what you're trying to accomplish. Oftentimes over the years, small business people would come in and say, well, I want to start a business. Well, what do you want to do? And, it starts going downhill from there because they have a really, really vague idea.
Right.
And they're a long way from having any kind of a plan.
Right.
So most of the times when small businesses come in and they don't get their loan, it's either because they don't have any reasonable capital availability and they don't have a good plan. Mm-hmm. So again, a good entrepreneur knows conceptually what they want to try to do, but they have a hard time sometimes putting it down on a piece of paper or articulating it. There again, using an outside partner, even if it's a paid consultant, to help you develop a plan, because remember, whether a banker approves that loan or not is going to be dependent on whether or not when you walk out, they believe this is going to be a successful venture.
Right.
It may be crystal clear in the small businessman's mind, but if he doesn't come across with clarity to the banker, they're going to turn the loan down. So go in with a well-prepared plan. I'm not talking about 50 pages. It doesn't have to be eloquently presented, but common sense. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here are the resources I have to accomplish it. Here's my fallback plan if I end up in challenges. Here's where I go when I need help. And mostly show them that you have a relentless commitment to success. And again, be a person of really good value. Bankers get to be really good at reading individuals. So small business people and other business people don't really understand the simplicity of bankers. When I sit down to talk to a client about a loan request, I'm only trying to answer two questions. Can they pay me, and will they pay me? Mm-hmm. The can they pay me, is all about the plan and the strategies.
Right.
The will they pay me is the look in the eye, it's the sense of integrity that I get, the feeling I get when I'm talking to them. Are they a person that I can trust? Because I'm getting ready to give them our company's money. And by the way, it's not our money, it's another client's money. Right. So I'm getting ready to give them your money, and I have a deep trusting relationship, responsibility to you, so I have to know that I can trust this person. So that's my general guidance. Try to convince that banker, I can pay you back, and I will pay you back.
Your comments are interesting. I go back a number of years to when I was 18 years old, and I'll never forget it. I walked into Northwestern Bank in Valdez, North Carolina. That's when it existed. And I applied for a car loan. I wanted to buy my first automobile, and I'll never forget the CEO of the local bank came up, he put his arms around me, and he said, "Son, will you pay this back?" I said, "Yes, Mr. Walton, I will." He said, "I believe that." He said, "I also know your mother and your uncle and your family, so I'm confident that you will."
Yeah.
And authorize the loan to be made. And I say that to say, today it seems like it is much more driven by credit score and numbers. So what role does a person's ethics and character really play in making those decisions?
Well, your example you described is an example I've heard thousands of times over the years. It's
sure.
the way banking was.
Right.
And banking is very different today and not necessarily better. I personally still would like to go back to the days when you could look a client in the eye, and if you have that feeling, if you have that understanding that you can trust them, a good handshake, and that's all you need. Because good, honest people working together can do things together, do projects together, make loans, pay back loans, and you don't have to rely on credit scores and tons of detailed documentation. We talked earlier about how the world has changed. The world has changed in my world in two regards. One, there are, I believe, more people today that have, let's say, less than desirable ethics, that are trying to get a loan with no intention of paying it back. There are a lot of people that are very smart and very evil. And they are really good at trying to pull the wool over the eyes, as we used to say in Eastern North Carolina, of the banker.
Right.
So the banker necessarily gets more skeptical when you experience more of that.
Right.
Just like when you were growing up, you probably walked out of the house and left the house unlocked, and you left
Sure.
the key in the car.
Sure.
And so did I. Not many people do that today. So the
Right.
world has changed, not for the better. Let's all work on making that reverse itself, but it is what it is. And then the other thing is that the banking world has become dramatically more regulated. You know, it's been creeping over the years, and then in the aftermath of the Great Recession, the people in Washington reached, I believe, an erroneous conclusion. Excuse me, but that conclusion was that the banks made the mess.
Right.
Because there were a lot of bad loans that were made, and a lot of people lost their houses and so forth. It's probably too complex to go into here, but I would just say that banks had culpability. Banks made mistakes, no doubt about that. But the real problem in this crisis, most people don't understand, is what's called the shadow banking system. When I first started making loans in 1972, all the loans in this country were made, about 80% of them were made by the banks. As we changed over those 40 years, going into the recession, only about 30% of the loans in this country were made by the banks. 50% of the loans that used to be made by the local bank were made through the shadow banking system. They were made by brokers, for example, in the mortgage lending business. They were put together in these packages called securities, and then they were sold by a lot of the New York banks and other people who did that type of business around the world, and the local bank had nothing to do with it. But when the people in Washington, concluded that we had this big problem, which we did, they said the banks did it. And frankly, they didn't really understand the difference between Main Street banks and shadow banks. But the public and the Congress concluded that the banks made a big mess and we have to fix the banks. Out of that came a really big bill in Congress called the Dodd-Frank Act.
Right.
That has 2,300 pages, requires 393 new rules, which will require thousands of sub-rules. Only about 2/3 of them have already been rolled out, 1/3 still to go. But the result of that is the banks today, I'm not trying to be defensive, I'm trying to be informative. The banks today have our hands tied in about everything we do. So a lot of times you go to the bank and you have to fill out 40 pages of this and all this. The banks don't want to do that. They're required to do that. The bankers today, I think, would be very comfortable with much more. If you came to see me 40 years ago to get a car loan, you'd sign about 2 or 3 pieces of paper. A note,
Right.
a lien on the title, and that was probably it.
Right.
You could have called me on Thursday afternoon and said, I'm going to pick up a car, can I get the loan? And I could have said, well, go and pick up the car, come by tomorrow at lunch and sign the note.
Right.
We can't do anything remotely like that today. We're hamstrung in terms of details and rules and regulations. We're doing the best we can to make it easy for the clients. So I'll just say to folks listening that, be a little empathetic with the bankers. They are good human beings. They're working really hard in the communities. They're working hard. And look, they want to make you the loan. That's how they make their living. And much of what's happened is because of some bad actors in the whole financial system. And now we have to repair that. We have to rebuild the image of the banking industry. And then over time, hopefully we can get the Congress to modify the laws to allow us to go back to banking a little more like when you grew up in Valdez.
Well, the pendulum does have a tendency to swing, and it will go both ways. And so as restrictive as it is, we can all hope that it'll get a little easier. I want to say I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I think it's fascinating to look at a company that's been around as long as BB&T has, with the commitment to ethics that it has, and that shows. Not only in the contribution you made to the University of North Georgia for the Center for Ethical Leadership, but in many, many other places where you're represented in the communities. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We appreciate being with you. Thanks for all the folks that are listening, for their business, for their support. Let's go out and work hard together and make this a better world and make a little better positive difference in the lives of every person we meet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.